Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are at in the world. Welcome to Legal On Technology's webinar, The Path to GC, Tips to Land and Lead at a Growth Company. As folks are trickling in, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and Legal On Technologies. My name is Corey Longhurst. I am the head of growth at Legal On. Our software helps innovative legal teams find and fix contract risks before you sign with AI and practical guidance content from our seasoned attorneys. I have the privilege of welcoming our panelists here today. Kathleen Hartje, the General Counsel at Runway, Robert Gonzalez, the General Counsel at Mercury, and Casey Johnson, the Chief Legal Officer and People Officer at Ancora. They'll be sharing their insights and experience on landing a GC role at a growth company and building a legal function and tech stack once you're in the seat. At Legal On, we've been privileged to have Kathleen, Robert, and Casey participate and provide feedback in the development of our contract review platform. They're smart, practical, and impressive. And I'm so excited to have each of you here today. Can each of you provide just a brief background and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, happy to jump in. I'm Kathleen Hartje. I'm the General Counsel at Runway. We are an applied AI research company in the video editing and generation space. I've been here for all of 2 months now. But before that, I built and led the legal department at Branch Metrics, a enterprise SaaS company in marketing technology. So I'll be able to talk both about the experience of building a department, but also a couple of times starting fresh as the first and only attorney. And I look forward to the conversation. Casey, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Impressive background, hard to follow. I'm Casey Johnson. I am the General Counsel and recently the Chief People Officer for Ancora Legal in General. We are a real estate development company out of DC, quite different than my last role, which was a pure tech company where I was the Chief Administrative Officer, and under me sat the legal function and the people function and sort of everything back of house, non-financial. We all know lawyers can't count. That's me right in the middle of that box there. I look forward to talking to the group here about my path as a GC, about potentially your path as a GC, and about the sort of amazing ways that you can leverage legal tech to get you there quicker. Thanks, Corey.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Gonzalez. I'm the General Counsel at Mercury. We provide banking services to startups and growing tech companies. Basically, we try to make banking that works and is actually a delightful customer experience. Before this, I was at a company called Samsara, where I helped build the legal team, and we actually took that company public about 2 years ago. And otherwise, before that, I was early stage first lawyer at Series A, B companies. So sort of seen lots of different stages of growth and scale. I'm excited to be here to talk to you all.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. And for folks in the audience, there's a small group of us, so please feel free to engage. The best way to engage is through the question and answer icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to type questions as you have them. We'll try to answer them during the course of the conversation. In addition, we'll save some time at the end of our conversation for some questions as well. So let's jump right in. The first question I have is what attracted each of you to the role of a GC? Did you know that you wanted to be a GC? Is it something that you just kind of fell into?
Happy to start. I did not know I wanted to be a GC. Going in-house, especially to a tech company, was the furthest thing from my mind during law school. And when I started at a law firm, I actually actively avoided all of the classes that would have been helpful and useful. So I started out as an appellate litigator in DC, and over the years really liked that work, but found myself more drawn to the business problems of our clients and sort of felt like I was missing out when we would help them win a case or solve a problem, but we were sort of the outside mercenaries. And I thought their in-house teams seemed really interesting. Like they had cool jobs and were really part of the company. So that's what drew me to wanting to do that myself.
Kathleen?
Oh.
Yeah, I'll follow Rob because our stories, as we learned when we were talking before, are strikingly similar here. I was an antitrust and appellate litigator, was also interested in going into be part of the solution versus part of the fixing the problem or part of fixing the problem after the fact. But what struck me was when I talked to friends who were in-house, most roles are not the only lawyer role or the top lawyer role, right? So naturally, my peers that I was talking to were folks who were in-house but working in litigation or working in product or working in commercial. And while so many of them loved their jobs, it became clear to me in speaking with them that the focus on one area didn't naturally appeal to me, which is why I gravitated towards a role where it was higher risk, no support, jumping in straight from a firm, but where I would be asked to tackle everything. But the flip side of that bargain was that the startup I went to knew what they were getting. They knew they weren't getting an expert in every area. And it was a really good fit where we were both taking a chance on each other with room to grow and learn into a lot of different practice areas that I became an expert in and now have carried into my new role. So that was just an interesting part of the journey for me, because when I talk to folks, if they do really enjoy a specific area, that's great. And like lean into that. And if that's what you want to do, then be a super expert in this area. But for others, if it resonates to have a broader practice area, that's something to think about.
Well, quite candidly, I started my search for an in-house counsel role coming off the heels of having my first baby and being constantly on the road here, there, and everywhere, and wanting to find something that would allow me to be more rooted, frankly, at home. So that's the candid answer. But the longer answer is I've always fancied myself a business person with a JD. I've never seen myself as like a true lawyer's lawyer, seeing things only in black and white or only as the law dictates. Instead, I've always thought of myself as a strategist who uses a JD to inform decisions. And I was also a litigator, finding myself on the back end of problems that I thought could have been solved with better planning, more thoughtfulness, and just frankly, better collaboration and discussion on the front end. And so as I thought about my career and I thought about the step to partnership, it was very apparent to me that that wasn't really the step that I wanted to take, because I felt my skill set and where I was happiest was being a business person. And I knew if I could get into a GC role and work more cross-functionally with non-lawyers, that I could be strategic and that I could add value in ways that you can't really when you're on the back end of a dispute and you're resolving it through litigation where conflict is everywhere and emotions are high. And so I was searching for that opportunity. And fortunately, while I was still in private practice, I sort of stumbled backwards into this fractional general counsel opportunity where I was helping very small companies figure out how to get going and figure out how to sort of structure themselves legally, everything from cap tables to terms and conditions. I mean, I was writing website terms and helping companies research what insurance they needed to get going, looking at Series A and seed rounds and things like that. And it was there that I realized that my passion for using my JD was in the business sense. And so I wanted to make the move in-house, and I have not looked back ever since. So that's how I made that move.
Casey, it sounds like you made that transition by sort of getting some fractional in-house experience at the firm that you were at.
Yeah.
Kathleen, Robert, How did you think about making that transition from a law firm directly into sort of a hybrid business general counsel type of a role?
I think the way I thought about it and the way I did it were actually pretty different. So I thought that I would do it through, an existing client of the firm, somewhere where I had already done work and knew folks. But those clients were mostly pretty big, and sort of to Kathleen's point earlier, like the roles were very specialized, and I was more interested in a generalist role. So I ended up doing it through relationships. It was actually someone I knew at a VC firm, knew that one of the portfolio companies was hiring for their first lawyer, and I also had a mutual connection with the CEO of that company. So sort of had two different relationships, and yeah, just kind of lucked out. Before I even really started my search, I met these folks, and they were willing to take a chance on a litigator for their first in-house hire.
What about you, Kathleen?
Yeah, I mean, Corey, you are generously presupposing a lot of planning and strategy and forethought. For me, it was more knowing that litigation was not going to be the right path, knowing that, say, going in-house to be a litigator there, which would have been a natural transition, didn't really appeal to me. And so for me, it was more a process of elimination. And actually, I spent a lot of cycles thinking about what industry do I want to be in? What job do I want next? And there was a lot happening out in the world and in the US in terms of reckoning about imbalances in gender leadership across business, government, and politics at the time that I made the move. And so I guess perhaps I did have some forethought, but in a different way than you might expect, which was I was really optimizing for a leadership role. And I went into my last company not knowing that I would eventually build a department, but I knew that the company felt like a good bet, and that there was and that they were taking a bet on me, and there was a chance that it would all work out in that way, and that I would get to be a legal executive at a tech company. That is how that panned out. But when I stopped thinking specifically about what is the specific industry, and focus and obsessing about that, but more about what do I really want? I want a leadership role. That's when the pieces really came together for me and the decision became easier.
And once you sort of made that decision, that sort of light came on that that's the role that you wanted, how did you find that role?
Well, for me, it was more that I was exploring what I wanted to do. I was talking with a lot of folks in my network, law school, my sports community, spreading the word that I was interested in exploring other options. Please keep me in mind if anything interesting comes up, whatever it may be. And I was having dinner with a law school friend who was a JD MBA, and he actually flagged that the company he was working at on the business side was looking for their first lawyer. And, we talked about the fact that I checked 0 of the boxes that would make sense for a first hire. But importantly, he was well respected at the company, and his opinion was well respected, and he had respect for me based on our time together. And it was more after talking to him that it even occurred to me that I could go be the first lawyer at a tech company. And that's when I had that train of thought that I just shared.
What about
Corey? Yeah, I also leveraged my network, and quite frankly, I reached out to my existing clients while I was in private practice, because I know that in-house roles usually socialize through other GCs and other in-house teams before they get posted to LinkedIn or any other job boards. So I started telling my clients, those that I trusted and those that I thought I had built a great relationship with, that I was looking to make that move, because, you know, the thought occurred to me that they were once in my seat and they would know how to make the move from private practice to an in-house role. Like Kathleen, I wanted a leadership role, mainly because I didn't want to be ultra specialized and go in-house and run in a narrow lane for a large company. I really wanted to use the business acumen that I thought I had, and certainly that didn't quite have as much as I hoped, but that's developed over the last, you know, call it decade. But I really wanted to find that leadership role. So I was targeted and I was patient. I said, here's what I'm hoping for. If you hear anything that you can think of that might be a good fit for me, please pass it along. And true to form, every role that I've had in-house has actually come to me from a client or from an outside counsel now that I'm in-house. So I think that is the smoothest path and the path that has the best information and the earliest information to what's open and what's available in the market.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice about you leveraging your network. I would also add, even if you don't have a network, like look for companies that you think are interesting, and don't hesitate to reach out to their founders or to folks on those teams. I know GCs who have landed fantastic jobs at companies that are on the path to an IPO just because they saw, you know, this company raised an A round and it doesn't look like they have a lawyer yet, but I can sort of think about some of the legal problems they might be facing. And they basically just, you know, cold LinkedIn messaged the founder and said, hey, do you want to talk about what building a legal team might look like? I mean, some of them might not answer, some of them might not be interested, but like there's not really that much loss in putting yourself out there.
Robert, it's a great point. That's actually how I built my fractional practice. There was no real role open for me. I just knew these companies needed legal help and probably couldn't afford a full-time legal hire at that point. So I reached out and I structured some pretty attractive packages for them from sort of the fee standpoint, be it a fixed fee or what have you. And it was in that space that I built a lot of great relationships with companies that needed legal help that were also able to sort of point and connect me, particularly in the tech world. So that's a really good point.
Casey, you mentioned sort of the importance of patience. It'd be helpful just to hear each of your experiences with some of the challenges that you faced and some of the patience that you had to sort of exercise during the time that you were trying to make that transition to an in-house or GC role.
Yeah. Well, like the rest of the panelists, I had a litigation background, and typically speaking, that's not what you see in the job description, especially for a GC when you're, you know, trying to scale a company for exit. They're looking for someone with securities experience, someone with extensive M&A experience, at a minimum, a lot of contract drafting experience. And as I looked at all the job descriptions, I thought, nope. And then I had this epiphany where I thought, actually, even though I have not done these specific things, I've litigated all of them. And I've sort of been on the back end of what happens when these issues go wrong. And so I flipped the way I was talking about my experience and the way I drafted my resume to actually reflect that I could absolutely speak to the things that they needed. And I tried to take sort of the glass half full mindset as opposed to the glass half empty. And I'd be willing to bet that anyone who's practiced law for long enough has transferable skills that can really fit seamlessly in an in-house department, because what you need is a great gut, a willingness to work cross-functionally, and you have to have the ability to see the forest through the trees. And those are things that lawyers develop as young lawyers and continue to develop over the years of practice. So be patient, but also be thoughtful about how you advertise yourself, because chances are you have exactly what you need to make the move. You just have to reframe the way you think about it. Maybe that's not the perfect answer to your question, Corey, but it's sort of the journey that I went on.
Is that similar for you, Kathleen and Robert?
Yeah, piggybacking off of a great point that Casey made, we're all here on this panel because eventually we got the role we wanted. And I don't want to assume too much about what Casey or Rob went through, but there are plenty of roles that we were in discussions for that we didn't get, or that we decided that weren't a good fit for us. And this is so commonly said, but it's so true. view those opportunities, even the ones that you don't get, even the ones where you're just doing an initial interview, to practice and refine your pitch. And eventually you'll find the right one. It's not one size fits all, but I eventually learned after a lot of iteration that what worked for me wasn't to try and pitch box checking, whether it was for my first role at branch or even for this role, but to pitch my analogous experience. For example, being at a generative AI company right now, I was not a generative AI legal expert, and frankly, there are very few, and a lot of people are now claiming to be that. But instead of trying to make myself into something I wasn't trying to pitch myself as a generative AI expert. I focused on my privacy experience, my deep privacy experience, really getting into the product, really building out a program, rolling up my sleeves, understanding data flows, staying on top of rapidly changing complex regulations, because that was the skill set I would need in the new job. And I could pick up the substance along the way. And that did resonate. But what I want to emphasize is it's not that I stumbled into that from the get-go. I refined my pitch over time.
Yeah. I'll add in terms of my journey, one thing that I kind of struggled with early on was like, what title am I looking for, right? I was like a 7th-year associate. I thought I was hot stuff, like a really good lawyer. And even though I hadn't been in-house, I was pretty confident that I would figure it out. So I was looking at, GC type roles. But honestly, a lot of founders or business folks that are hiring for the first lawyer don't really know how to frame it. So some might put GCs, some might put head of legal, some might just put corporate counsel or commercial counsel or something. And so early on in my search, I was like, if I saw corporate counsel, I would say, okay, that's probably not a fit because I'm not a corporate lawyer and maybe it's too junior for me or something like that. But really, if you open up your aperture and like try to look more at the company, the people, what their needs might be, it really opens up a lot of opportunities. So actually, like I know a lot of companies that have ultimately hired a GC, even though the initial posting was for a corporate counsel, for example. And that's actually how I ended up talking to Mercury. They had sort of envisioned hiring a corporate counsel role, which is not what I was looking for next in my career, but I didn't foreclose talking to them because I knew they didn't have a lawyer. I knew they had a lot of regulatory issues. I knew they were growing. So I think being a little flexible and trying to think more about, is it a fit as opposed to like, is it exactly the title I want or need? That part you can figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a good transition to a question from the audience, which is GC and CLO titles are scarce and rarely handed out. What sort of non-legal skills do leaders of a company value in order to view you as a general counsel? Even, for instance, Robert, in some of those circumstances where you may start as a commercial counsel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Kathleen and Casey have a lot of great answers here, but I'll throw out a couple. I think, and I don't know if, I mean, one is communication ability, right? The ability to be able to talk to other executives, to partners, and talk to folks in a way that business people will understand, not in a legal way. And then the other one that's been really important to me, I think, has been just being a general operator as opposed to a lawyer. So I've also had to run, people departments and help run a finance department at one point in my career. And again, had no idea what I was doing, but the team trusted me that I could not just like look at contracts or solve legal issues, but that I could also build a team, manage a team, help things run smoothly.
Corey, I'm happy to go next. I have a tenured history of accepting purely legal roles that become operational roles in addition to legal fairly soon after I've started. Each role I've taken has morphed in that way. And I actually find myself almost more attracted to the operations than the purely legal work that I do now. I think the skill set that has made that possible, to Robert's great point, is the ability to work as a lawyer with non-lawyers and to sort of make legal issues relatable and achievable. If I wanted to say no to everything because there was a legal risk out there, I would not be a valuable member of a leadership team. I would effectively be outside counsel with too much of a sort of risk adverse position. So it's my job to help us achieve our business goals with recognition of the legal sort of landmines that are around me. And it's like sort of the highest privilege that you can get as a general counsel, to be consulted and thought of for issues that impact the business that aren't purely legal. Hey, could you help me weigh in on what you think our new bonus structure could be? Could you help me weigh in on, could you listen to this marketing pitch and see if you like it? So just ways that you work as a lawyer, but cross-functionally, I think, are what make GCs, or what make a corporate counsel perhaps ready for that GC role.
I'll take a slightly different tack, potentially controversial, but that is the idea here with the title, that sometimes it frankly isn't about you. And what I mean by that is it's about the company, what they're looking for and what they need at the time. So you may be a star with years of experience as an AGC at a top-notch SaaS company, but if you're going to a startup where their primary goal is to bring someone in who can handle mostly commercial contracts and then troubleshoot on everything else with an uncertain IPO timeline, frankly, they may just not need somebody, or they may not need to declare right now that somebody is their general counsel, or that they'll ever need a general counsel. And for part of my career, and I know this is really common, it's easy to internalize that and decide that if you don't have the general counsel title, it's because you're not a general counsel, or because you don't have that capability, or you don't have that experience. But sometimes it's just not about you and not what the company needs. So if you see an opportunity where it may not be that role yet, but it could be someday, over time, I was promoted a couple times as I did build and lead a department, title changed and all that. That's just something to think about, which is this may not be about me and what title I deserve based on my resume, but like, what does the company need now? And then can I grow into that?
And I think that brings up sort of another strand of this conversation, which each of you come from a law firm background. What advice do you have for people who are sitting in an in-house role, looking to either sort of advance in the company that they're at now, as you're talking about, Kathleen, or potentially seek opportunities in other sort of in-house teams?
I can speak to the advancement within the department, starting out more on the, I hate to use the word junior because I did come in like director level and built a department, but to Casey's point, I looked for leadership opportunities outside my direct scope. And for me, what really spoke to me was trying to affect change in DEI, advising the company on things like supporting ERGs, supporting caregivers in the workplace, retention of women in the workplace. And those are things where I know it can be tricky, because sometimes it feels like free work that's unrewarded. I was fortunate to be in a culture and at a company that did value that work. I could talk about it in my performance reviews as a contribution that I made that made me a valuable leader at the company, and that made sense and it resonated. And I'm confident that that contributed to my internal promotion over the years. I know that that doesn't always work out in your workplace, so you'll have to read that out and read the culture. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be other means to step up within your department or outside your department.
Corey, I'll speak to the question of sort of how to make the move in-house, or at least the things that I did to make myself attractive. I like to say that landing my first GC role, which to Robert's point was actually a corporate counsel title that I then changed to VP of Legal, that then changed to GC once they understood what a GC was and that I was doing what a GC does. So great point, Robert. But I took control of the application and the interview process. I was not a passive candidate. So what I mean by that is I looked at LinkedIn and I looked at any possible point of connection that my network had to the hiring team for the company that I was joining. And I reached out to my network and I said, hey, I'm applying for this role. I really need your help to land this job. There are hundreds of applicants that are doing the same thing. You'll see that any GC role, there's so many applicants. So you've got to do something to differentiate yourself to rise to the top of the list. And if you don't have a direct connection personally, I bet someone in your network knows someone in the company or knows someone who knows the company that you can reach out to. And when I finally got the job, the president of the company said to me, I want you to know that the reason that you got this job was because of how you interviewed and how you kept showing up in the interview process. I didn't go a day without someone saying, hey, did you see Casey Johnson's resume? Because I had sort of done all I could to make myself relevant and to put myself in front of this president over and over again. That has continued to be the way that I've advanced in my career. I've tried to make myself relevant and tried to show up in thoughtful ways. But I think don't be a passive applicant. You'll never get a job if you're not actively involved in the process. Don't be afraid to say, hey, did you get my application? I'd love to take you for coffee. It's cliche, I get it. But if you don't do it, I promise you, you won't get the job. You're not going to stumble into a GC role. It isn't going to happen. So take control of it just like you would any other aspect of your career that you're passionate about, and try to set yourself apart from the hundreds of other applicants who are just hoping that someone on the recruiting team calls them back.
I love your point, Casey, about taking the bull by the horns and the role and shaping the process. For when I was looking, when I was contemplating a couple different options for making a move earlier this year, both roles that I was considering were unposted. And even for my prior branch role, the role was unposted. And the first time 5 years ago, this didn't occur to me, but for the second time for both companies, I offered to write the job description. I actually think that if you are going to a company that hasn't had a lawyer yet, you may have a better chance, or you may have a better understanding of what the company needs than what the company does. And then you can draft up what you think your role is, the level of seniority, the value add, and put a title that makes sense with that. And that's also a great way to confirm in advance, if you're going for this kind of role, that you are actually aligned with the company on what their needs are and what they're willing to ask you to do and how they see the role. And if you're proposing something that's super strategic and they are, and they're not seeing it, then that's a really good signal. And that doesn't mean you have to take yourself out, but then you know what you're getting.
Let's transition to once you are in the seat. What's the most important thing to get right in the first 90 days? And what are some things that you did and you wish you didn't?
I liked this question yesterday, Corey, so I'll kick off, and I know the other panelists have great ideas as well. My answer is sort of the opposite of what I did. It's oftentimes what you don't do in the first 90 days that sets you up for great success on down the line. What I mean by that is I have a tendency to come into a new role and I want to make things my way. I want to change things up. I want my team. I want my outside counsel. I want my contract management policy or process. I want my legal tech to come on board. And what I have done wrong in previous roles is make those changes right away without first getting to know and understand the business. then what you do is you lose continuity, because if you're kicking out people that have been in the process or have been part of the company for the sake of sort of your own ego, you're losing a chance to learn from the people, learn the pain points, learn the upside, and to build upon that. So I think obviously you need to have a thoughtful 90-day plan and you need to make meaningful impact on the business. But what you should also do is listen and learn and observe before making any real changes when you don't yet know the business's needs.
Robert, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the other one is just to start building the relationships as quickly as you can. I think it's critical during that time period to just go out of your way and meet with folks. And obviously that includes leadership, but really you should be meeting with folks sort of across the company to make sure you understand the product, you understand how things work. You start learning some of the pain points of the company, and that way you can like develop the plan that is really going to add value. Because if you haven't done that homework, right, you could come and say, okay, my 90-day plan is I'm gonna set up a contract management system and do this and that. But like that might not be that important to the company. Like you might think it is, but it might not be. They might have like a burning regulatory issue, and that could be 100% of your time, and that could be the best use of your time for the first 90 days. So you really have to understand what the need is and then target your attention there.
Yeah, I echo Rob's point about focusing. Well, I mean, both Rob and Casey made the point about relationship building. I'll add another angle on that, which is not only do it to learn the pain points, do it to set out your strategy, but do it because your success as a GC is predicated on building strong relationships across the business. And the more time that goes on, the harder it is to build those relationships. So it may be tempting to parachute in and be the hero by reviewing all the contracts or doing a major privacy assessment right away. But if you knock that out, and that's amazing, and you can show some wins, but you're 3 months in and you haven't really gotten to know your head of sales or your head of people or your finance counterpart, it can be harder, 4 months in to say, okay, now let's get to know each other. There is a window when you start where you're the hot new thing, everyone wants to get to know you, and people will set aside the time, and you can go for a walk with somebody for an hour and people are willing to do that. And frankly, it's just natural that gets harder as time goes on. So don't view that as a frivolous thing, but actually a core part and a must do in your first 90 days.
And how do you keep those relationships going? How do you continue to build those relationships, build those open lines of communication across your business?
Corey, I was going to add on to Kathleen's comment, but I think I can tackle this question in doing so. One of the biggest obstacles I think any new GC or frankly any in-house legal team in general faces is finding a way to make the legal team be viewed by business partners not as a stumbling block or as a hurdle or as a slowdown or as overly conservative. Things go into this black hole of legal and they never come out and we never get anything done. And the truth of the matter is, in some ways, that is legal's job. It is our job to assess risk and to stop things from going forward when there is too much legal risk. But the focus has to be on creating relationships so that the business views the legal team not as an obstacle, but as an advocate and as an important part of making any decision in the business, so that my marketing colleague doesn't think, oh, I have to send this contract to Casey and her team and it's never going to come out. But hey, we should send this to Casey before we move forward so that she can help us think through X, Y, and Z. And I think creating those relationships, and really what it comes down to is creating trust so that your cross-constituent partners trust you and trust your expertise so much so that they want you to be involved even when it's not, to my earlier comment, purely legal. So I think, finding ways to relate and finding ways to make time for your partners, both at the executive level, to Robert's point, and below, because quite frankly, you don't always work with just the executive team and the legal function, is critical to making sure that the legal function is sort of soundly reviewed and part of the whole fabric of the company.
And how do you think about sort of building your team, hiring your team, as the legal function grows around you?
Yeah, for me, it was really important to hire generalists at first, right? So you might have, depending on how fast the company is growing and what sort of budget you have, let's say you have, one or two roles that you can hire for in your first year. For me, there was a calculus like, hey, there's so much work to go around. Like if I hire a lawyer that's just a commercial lawyer or just a regulatory lawyer, yeah, well, like they'll go deep on that space, but they're not going to be able to help me cover like the 10 other things that I can't get to at all. So, so I focused on hiring smart generalists at first. I think there's a point where you sort of have to, as the team grows, where you have to rethink that. And there are certain areas where you probably need some deeper expertise, right? So like employment law, generalists can handle that for a while, but at a certain level of scale, you probably need someone in-house who's specialized in that, or depending on what your business is, right? It might be IP or it might be regulatory, but I like to start with generalists just because that's also my mindset. And I think it creates a strong core of the team.
When faced with this question, at my last role, I was torn between hiring a generalist who would run point primarily on commercial contracts, but also flex elsewhere, versus hiring a legal operations specialist. And I asked around, and the reason I thought about the latter, because common wisdom from a lot of folks I was getting was, there's so much work that only you can do. Why not hire someone that you can share that work with? And what I'm going to say isn't universal, but at my last company, we were growing so quickly at the time that I had my first headcount that it became really clear that a lot of the processes that we had were not scaling well. And that a lot of my time was spent things like routing contracts for signature, filing contracts, trying to assess CLMs, but not successfully actually diving in and understanding them. And it became really, and frankly, those were the parts of my job that I was least excited about, not just the administrative work, but also really important strategic questions like a CLM. So advice that I got from one GC that really stuck out to me was, you can't go wrong either way. But I had shared that I was thinking about hiring someone away from my old law firm who I thought would be great in this role. And this GC said, great legal ops people are worth their weight in gold. If you have somebody in mind, go get that person. And I did, and it was a great ride for 2 or 3 years together before they went and spread their wings to an even bigger company. And I'm really excited for them. But for us, it ended up being the right call to start with legal operations so that they could take off my plate not only work that I didn't have to do it anymore, but frankly, someone who was better about understanding systems, understanding tech. So for us at our scale and growth stage, that decision worked out well. I ended up hiring as my second hire, the generalist who could focus on commercial, which was a great move. But so really look around and see what your company's needs are. Not only what do I want to hand off, but frankly, what will someone else be better at?
Yeah, strong +1 to the legal ops hire. That was my second hire, and she's been an absolute lifesaver and just made our team like so much more efficient, brought on great technology, makes us look really good day in and day out to the rest of the company. So yeah, strong +1.
Yeah, and not much more to add because I echo that sentiment so much. I've had the same legal ops paralegal with me for 3 companies now, and I continue to bring her with me everywhere I go, and she makes me just exponentially more effective, efficient, happy. She's wonderful.
All of you touched on this a little bit, but how do you think about using and building technology to help your team scale, to operate more efficiently? What are the things that are most important as you're thinking through how to build your tech stack?
For me, I mean, I think one step is just it's critical to even think about it, right? You can't, especially if you're at a tech company, you can't just be like, oh, I'm a lawyer, so like I don't use Slack or I don't understand APIs or whatever it is. Even if you don't understand those things, like you have to learn and push yourselves. You can't like sort of force the business into whatever like old tooling used at the law firm or you know, Excel spreadsheets or whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. So you have to push yourself. The other thing is related is like meeting the business where they are. So our business happens almost entirely on Slack. We're like a very remote friendly company and we barely use email. Most discussions happen in hi there. Most discussions happen in public channels. And so you have to meet them where they are. So when we were looking at legal intake systems, for example, a lot of them were not integrated into Slack, and it was a non-starter for us. Like, we're not going to make the business go send us an email when 100% of the time they're on Slack.
So I learned how to multitask really well when I had kids. And Robert, I heard all of that despite also having a conversation with my 4-year-old about what he's having for lunch. Sorry to be an interruption there. Okay. I think, Corey, about it from an efficiency standpoint and what I call the highest and best use of everyone's time. When you think about a small legal function or a scaling legal function, I'm trying to put people in places to where they can make the biggest impact on the business with the hours that they have in the day. And so leveraging a legal tech product allows me to, for NDAs, for example, or other routine commercial contracts, just do less of that so that I can free up people's sort of human capital and their brain space to do the more sophisticated senior level thinking that I need them to be doing on a lean team.
A question from the audience. Do any of you advise your companies on internal employment issues? And what resources would you suggest to GCs for employment matters?
Yeah, I, as the chief people officer for the company, I am absolutely squarely in the middle of all employment issues. But even notwithstanding that title, I think a smart human resources professional works very closely with the legal team or the general counsel on all employment related, particularly sensitive employment related topics. I have found myself a trusted network of outside counsel that I know will answer when I call for anything hot or sensitive. The truth of the matter is people topics, when they come up, are the most pressing. I like to say, if you put people first, you'll always have a successful business. And I believe that's true when the topics are positive or negative. So just having that trusted outside counsel bench to consult on a moment's notice, I think is critical in the people space because it's always time sensitive.
Yeah. And one thing I would add to that, I think that's exactly right. You want to have them lined up in advance, but also you want to think carefully about who's on that bench. So a lot of companies, maybe before they have a GC, will like just use their main big law firm that they use for corporate work to also advise on their employment issues. And in my experience, that's often not a great fit. Like, I've had really good success finding folks that have maybe been at big law firms, but have started their own solo practices or joined smaller employment-focused firms who work with a lot of tech companies. So they see a lot of issues and just have a really good sort of judgment and risk tolerance. And those have been like the best advisors for day-to-day employment issues, as opposed to like the employment person who's dealing with a bunch of Fortune 500 companies on their like most sensitive investigations. They're not really like day-to-day startup growth operators in my mind.
I also have dealt with employee issues in my last 2 roles, and frankly, don't have much to add to what Casey and Rob shared. I guess I keep an eye out on law firm bulletins and will occasionally forward them to my employment counsel and say, does this apply to us? Do I have to do anything? But hopefully if you have someone really good, they're already letting you know when those things come up.
And as more people have questions, we're certainly winding down with time. So feel free to use the Q&A function to ask those questions. Another question from the audience, this one specifically for Casey. When you're wearing 2 hats, for example, as a CLO and a chief administrative officer or a chief people officer, how do you deal with conflicts that might arise from successfully fulfilling both roles?
It's a great question. And of all the things that sort of keep me up at night from time to time, is figuring out which hat to wear and when, and how to sort of straddle the fences that I'm often faced with straddling. The short answer is I hire great members of my team to serve as deputies, so that when I need to be in a space that I know there's no sort of conflict or crossing of the boundaries, I can deputize my lawyer or my VP of legal to make sound decisions on behalf of the function, so that I can attribute my time and strategy or decision making to the other function. I also leverage outside counsel when that happens, when there's a particular issue where I need to sort of roll myself off from a decision. You see it come up in the employment investigations and things like that. So I think having a sound team internally and externally, and trusted people on both sides creates at least the solidification that I need to feel comfortable that I can make the decisions I need to be making. But it's definitely a ping pong match and a sort of multiple balls in the air that I have to juggle to do that efficiently.
And one last question for today. What do you love most about your role? And how do you craft your role to be able to do more of that?
Well, Corey, since I'm already off mute, I'll answer first. I love most about my role working with non-lawyers. I mean, I'm obviously very similar to most lawyers out there, and at least in our core aspects, and I have many great friends who are lawyers, Corey being one of them. But I just love learning and being around non-lawyers. I've become such a better businesswoman by listening to the way that non-lawyers think and how they evaluate problems and how they communicate with their colleagues. And it's just really cool to get to see that in practice and get to implement some of the strategies and the learnings that I get to witness on a daily basis, working with people who are experts in other fields.
One of my favorite parts of the role is being involved in not just legal strategy, but company strategy. I'm in an industry right now where those things are connected. And so part of your question about how to pursue that, I'll echo a couple points that I've already made and bring it all full circle is, when I was looking for my next role, one deep consideration was how involved would I get to be in company strategy? And then a second point is I was speaking earlier about relationships and the importance of building and maintaining those throughout. And those are the relationships, and that's the foundation for being called upon to contribute to company strategy, not only commenting from a legal perspective, but as a business person with a legal background.
Yeah, for me, I love product counseling, and in particular, sort of product regulatory work. And it really marries like my interest in the technology and having an impact with our customers with sort of my interest in the legal side and how the administrative state works and how regulations work, which is like what I started my career doing. So yeah, I'm lucky that I found a role at Mercury where like those things are front and center for the business. So basically any product we launch is going to be in a heavily regulated industry. and even like smaller features or different things we want to offer our customers have significant regulatory and compliance implications. Like we can't launch product, we can't improve the customer experience unless we do the product regulatory analysis. So it's just super fun to get to help the business do things that then have a very tangible impact on the product and the customers.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us today. It's been great to hear your insights, great to hear sort of tips on how to start at a GC role and how to succeed once you're there. If folks in the audience want to learn how AI can help you spend less time in the weeds so you can do some of that more higher level strategic work that you love, check out our website, get a demo at legalontech.com. We're also going to be continuing to have a series of webinars over the next several months. So we'll be in touch with a recording of this webinar as well as some more information. Again, thank you so much to Kathleen, Robert, Casey. Great to have you.
Thank you, Corey. A lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.